Hello and welcome to the Alpha Edge Podcast, the show for men over 50 who refuse to fade out, slow down, play small, or settle for average. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm a healthy aging expert, coach, and founder of the Alpha Edge, and I am here to help you get and stay strong in every dimension of your life, physically, mentally, emotionally, morally, and spiritually. You're here because you're ready to reclaim your power, to own your masculinity, and lead your life with strength and purpose. If you're ready to sharpen your edge, revive your drive, and lead like a man who's built for more, you're in the right place. All right, men, let's get after it. All right, men, let's get real here for a minute. Who are you when everything falls apart? Not who you say you are when life is calm, when the bills are paid, when the gym gains are solid, the schedule is smooth, and you're crushing your checklist. Not that, but who are you when the storm hits? When the sky goes black, when the ship starts to break apart, when every man around you is panicking, that's where we find out who the real leaders are. Because, let's be honest, everyone's a leader when things are easy. Everyone talks about discipline, purpose, and vision when the waters are still. But storms strip away the performance. Storms reveal what's real. Storms expose the men who have anchors and the ones who just had opinions. And today we're going to talk about Paul's shipwreck. You can find this story in your Bible in the New Testament. It's in Acts chapter 27. Now, I know many of you have probably heard this story before, and maybe you think this is just some old tale about a missionary who gets caught up in a hurricane. But this isn't just a story about survival. This is a masterclass in masculine leadership under pressure. Paul's not the captain. He's not the centurion. He doesn't have any rank or authority. But when the ship's going down, every man on board starts looking to him. Why? Because he had what most modern men are missing: clarity of purpose, an unshakable connection with God, a peace that couldn't be drowned. So let me bring this back to you. When the storm hits your house, when your marriage is strained, when your kids are scared, when your job falls apart, the doctor calls, or the darkness just won't lift, what kind of man do you become? Because the storms are coming, brother. Some of you are in a storm right now. And this episode is here to show you that the storm isn't your end. It's your proving ground. It's the moment you rise. It's where you stop pretending and start leading. So guys, tighten your grip, square your shoulders, because by the time we're done here, you're going to see when the ship goes down, God raises up storm-tested men. Let's get into it. Okay, guys, let's rewind the tape here for just a second, because before Paul ever stood in that storm-tossed ship, before he ever delivered that famous line, "Not a single life will be lost," before the timbers cracked or the sails ripped and the Roman guards lost their minds, Paul was a man on a mission. You see, Acts 27 isn't a story that starts with a storm, it starts with conviction. Paul had been arrested for preaching the gospel. He's under Roman guard, being transported to Rome to stand before Caesar. But in the eyes of the world, he's a prisoner. He's shackled, silenced, useless. But in the eyes of heaven, he's a weapon, a man on divine assignment, a messenger headed straight to the belly of the beast with fire in his bones and God's favor on his life. And the culture all around him, absolute freaking chaos. Rome is drunk on power. Jews are angry and divided. The early church is under fire. Paul's life is being threatened from every side. It's a world full of compromise, corruption, confusion. Sound familiar? And yet, Paul never flinches. He doesn't lose his identity because of the political tension. He doesn't bend his mission to match public opinion. He doesn't whine about the injustice, complain about the storm, or negotiate with fear. He knows exactly who he is. He knows exactly where he's going. And he knows exactly why he's been called. Men, when you've got clarity of calling, you can walk through hell without losing your peace. That's what made Paul so dangerous. He wasn't chasing comfort. He wasn't chasing applause. He wasn't chasing success. He was chasing obedience. And obedience led him straight into a ship full of pagans and prisoners, into a storm so fierce that even seasoned sailors gave up hope. So let that sink in for a minute, because some of y'all are in the middle of chaos right now, and you're asking, God, why am I here? Maybe the storm didn't come because you disobeyed. Maybe it came because you obeyed. You're not in this mess by accident. You're in it on assignment. So here's the question. Can you hold your ground when the ship starts to creak? Can you lead even when you're in chains? Can you carry peace into panic? Because that's what Paul did. And that's what us Alpha Edge men are being called to do right now in our homes, in our marriages, in our churches, in a culture that's spinning sideways and out of control. You don't need the title. You don't need the position. You just need conviction. And we're about to see what happens when the warning goes off and no one listens. Because here's where things start to shift. Okay, so the ship is loaded, 276 souls on board, the journey to Rome has begun, and Paul, our man in chains, is paying attention. The skies look good, the breeze feels right, everything seems fine, but Paul senses something deeper. He's not watching the weather, he's listening to God. In Acts 27:10 we read, "Men, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only to cargo in the ship, but also our lives." All right, let's hit pause here. Paul's not a sailor. He's not the ship owner. He's not the captain. He's not the Roman officer in charge. He's actually a prisoner. But he speaks up anyway. Why? Because real men don't need permission to lead. They don't wait for authority. They operate from conviction. Paul senses danger. He senses the warning, and he opens his mouth, not to score points, but to protect lives. But what happens? They blow him off. "Thanks, preacher boy. We'll listen to the captain, the owner, and the guy with the actual nautical charts. Look, we've done this before. We know what we're doing, so just sit there in your chains." And so they keep on their way. And look, this part is key. Leadership doesn't always mean that people listen, but it does mean you speak anyway. Because silence in the face of danger is cowardice, not wisdom. Some of you right now are seeing the warning signs in your life, in your home, in your marriage, in your kids, in your spirit. But you've convinced yourself it's not your place to speak up. You're not the one in charge. You're not the pastor. You're not the boss. You're just the guy trying to stay in his lane. But look, if God gave you eyes to see, he expects you to use your voice. Paul didn't warn them so that he would be liked or that they would let him free. He warned them because he was faithful. And even though they ignored him, that moment matters because when the storm finally hits, they remember what he said. And that's the turning point because the man they ignored before the storm becomes the man they follow in the storm. You don't always see the fruits of your leadership right away. Sometimes your words seem wasted until the wind picks up and people realize this guy saw this coming. So here's the gut check. What storms are you sensing right now? What warning is God asking you to give? Are you staying silent to keep the peace, or are you speaking truth to prepare for war? Because men don't react, they prepare, and Paul was prepared. He warned, they ignored, but when everything fell apart, they turned to him. So let's see what happens when the storm finally breaks loose. Okay, guys, so the warning has been ignored, the ship set sail, and now the skies are turning black. Acts 27:14 says, "But soon a tempestuous wind called a northeaster struck down from the land." Look, this wasn't a drizzle. This wasn't an inconvenient breeze. This was a violent, chaotic, hurricane-force storm. The kind that tears sails, snaps ropes, and shatters confidence. The kind of storm that makes seasoned sailors, men who've spent their entire lives on the sea, start praying to any God who'll listen. The Bible says the ship was violently storm-tossed, and by the third day, they threw their gear overboard. By day 14, they had stopped eating. They lost sleep. They lost strength. And worst of all, they lost hope. Acts 27:20 says, "All hope of our being saved was at last abandoned." All hope. That's where most men break, when they've done everything they know to do, and it's not enough. When the tools don't work, when the systems collapse, when the "I've got this" mindset finally hits a wall. This is where boys fail. This is where egos drown. This is where fake strength gets swallowed whole. But Paul doesn't panic. Paul doesn't run. Paul doesn't beg. Paul stands up. In the middle of all this chaos, in the middle of all this fear, in the middle of a ship full of hardened men who have completely unraveled, Paul steps forward with presence. Acts 27:22 says, "Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship." Take heart. These guys haven't eaten in 2 weeks. They're puking over the rails. They're soaking wet. They're freezing. They're exhausted. They're convinced they're about to die. And Paul is telling them, take heart. Why? Because he had something the storm couldn't touch, a promise from God. Acts 27:23. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. Paul had a word, a mission, a divine assignment. And when you know who you belong to, when you know who you serve, when you know your life has a purpose beyond comfort, you don't panic, you lead. Hear me, Paul didn't suddenly become a leader in that moment. He was already a leader. The storm just revealed it. Because storms don't build character, they reveal it. Look, some of you are in the middle of a storm right now. Your business is struggling. Your marriage is rocky. Your mental health is under siege. You feel chained, tossed around, beat up by wave after wave. But if you belong to Jesus, if you're on a mission, if you've been walking in obedience, then I want you to hear me clearly. You may lose the ship, but you will not lose the promise. Your job is not to calm the storm. Your job is to carry presence in the middle of it, to speak life when others speak fear, to stand when others fall, to point to God when everyone else is looking at the waves. You don't have to be the loudest. You don't have to be the strongest. You don't have to be the most experienced. You just have to be anchored. The men on that boat didn't follow Paul because he was in charge. They followed him because he was anchored to something stronger than the storm. All right, guys, let's keep going because Paul's about to step into full-on leadership mode here. All right, guys, so again, picture this. The boat is groaning. The men are white-knuckling whatever they can grab onto. Water's pouring over the rails. Visibility's gone. The storm's howling all around. And every natural instinct says, this is it. We're dead. So what do? Acts 27:29 says, fearing that we might run onto the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. 4 anchors. This is desperation mode. All hands on deck. They've thrown everything else overboard by this time, but this is their last hope. And yet, it's not the physical anchors that matter the most here. Because while the sailors are scrambling to secure the ship, Paul is anchored to something far more solid, the unbreakable word of God. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid. That's Paul's anchor. Let me ask you something. What are you anchored to when the storm hits? Because your job, it can sink. Your bank account, it could be wiped clean. Your title, your reputation, your comfort, your plans, all of it gone in a wave. But the promises of God, they don't move. God didn't feel safe. He was anchored in truth. He didn't have visibility, but he did have vision. He didn't know how this was all going to play out, but he knew who would get him through it. And that was enough. Man, there are far too many of us anchoring our peace in our performance, in control, in success, in specific outcomes. But none of those things will hold when the storm really rips. When the storm tests your marriage, your mind, your mission, you need something eternal. Hebrews 6:19 says, we have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. That's what Paul had. And it's what every man listening to this right now needs. Because here's the thing. When you're anchored in God's promises, you don't have to manipulate. You don't have to micromanage. You don't have to white knuckle your way through the storm. You just stand. And when you do, other men, panicking, drifting, flailing, will look to you. They'll want to know what's different. Why you're not rattled, why you're still calm, why you're speaking life when they're speaking death. And you'll know why, because you've got an anchor that doesn't sink. So guys, here's the gut check. What's your anchor? If everything got stripped away today, if the storm came tonight, would you still be standing? Would your wife feel safe with you at the helm? Would your kids see you as a man of peace or a man of panic? Would your brothers look to you for strength? Or would they look past you for leadership? Because the time to anchor yourself isn't in the storm, it's before it. Paul didn't wait until the sky fell to find his footing. He was already planted. He was rooted. So plant yourself now in the word, in prayer, in conviction, in a God who cannot fail. Because when everything else gets ripped away, that's the anchor that holds. All right, guys, the ship's about to break apart, but Paul's leadership is just getting started. So everything that Paul said is happening. The storm won't let up. The crew's barely holding on. And now the ship strikes a reef. Acts 27:41 tells us the bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. All right, so the ship is done. The thing carrying them, the thing they were relying on, is coming apart beneath their feet. And here's what I want every single one of you listening to hear. Sometimes God lets the ship break because you were never meant to reach your calling in that vessel. Let me say that again. Sometimes the thing you thought you needed, the business, the plan, the platform, the system, the perfect circumstances, it has to break so you'll finally trust the mission, not the means. Paul never put his faith in the ship. He put his faith in God's words. So when the ship breaks, Paul doesn't flinch. He doesn't panic. He doesn't try to duct tape it back together. He leads. Acts 27:33. Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. Think about that. The guy in chains, the nobody on the manifest, is now running the ship. Why? Because he's the only one with peace. He's the only one with clarity, the only one with conviction that didn't drown the minute the boat hit the reef. And he does something very powerful. In Acts 27:35, we see he took bread and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. In the middle of chaos, Paul breaks bread. Not in church, not in a peaceful moment, not around a well-lit dinner table. He breaks bread in the middle of the storm. Because Paul knows who he is, who he belongs to, and why he's still breathing. And here's what happens next. Acts 27:44 tells us, and so it was that we were all brought safely to land. All of them. Not because the ship held, not because the storm stopped, not because the crew somehow figured it out, but because one man stood anchored in purpose while everything else went to hell. Guys, hear me loud and clear. You may lose the ship. You may lose the structure, the system, the plan you thought would carry you, but you will not lose the mission. Your calling still stands. Your leadership still matters. Your obedience still counts. And sometimes the most powerful testimony is that you came crawling out of the surf, wet, bruised, bleeding, but still standing, still leading, still trusting, still pointing men to God. So if you're in a season where the ship is breaking up, don't confuse that with failure. Maybe God's doing exactly what needs to be done to get you where he wants you. The vessel is temporary. The vision is eternal. All right, guys, let's hit the beach here with our final charge. Let's be real. Anyone can look like a leader when the skies are clear and blue and the sails are full. Anyone can post motivational quotes, read the books, wear the merch, and say all the right things. But storms don't care about your image. Storms expose what's real. And here's what the story of Paul's shipwreck teaches us. Leadership isn't about position, it's about presence. When the waves start hitting your marriage, your mind, your finances, your faith, you've got two options. Panic like the rest or stand like Paul. Because the man your family needs isn't the one who always has all the answers. It's the one who knows where the anchor is. So guys, let me ask you, when your wife is breaking down, can you stand up with peace and clarity? When your kids are watching your every move, do they see chaos or calm confidence? When your business is taking hits, can you still speak life into your team, even while bleeding? Because, Ben, this world is in a storm right now. Morals are cracking. Masculinity is under siege. Faith is mocked. Discipline is rare. And purpose, basically forgotten. And the world is looking around asking, who do we follow now? That's your call. Like Paul, you may not be the guy with the title. In fact, you might be the prisoner in chains. But if you are anchored to God's word, if you walk with integrity, if you refuse to quit, they'll follow you. Because in a world full of unanchored men, anchored men are dangerous. They're calm when others rage. They're consistent when others crumble. They're faithful when others flee. They don't need applause. They don't need credit. They don't need comfort. They need one thing, to finish the mission. Let me remind you of something Paul said before the storm. In Acts 27:24, we read, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar." The storm didn't cancel the calling, the shipwreck didn't change the mission, and the chaos didn't shift the leadership mantle. So what about you? What has God called you to stand before? What purpose are you running towards? What promises are you anchored in? Because here's the Alpha Edge truth. Storms are coming. Ships are going to break. But men of God do not flinch. They lead. They obey. They stay dangerous. All right, guys, let's land this plane, or let's dock this ship, I suppose would be a better analogy, not with fluff, but with fire. This is where we're going to issue the charge, throw down the gauntlet, and call you men to step into real leadership, even when everything around you is shaking. So look, this story isn't about Paul, it's about you. Because whether you realize it or not, your ship is always sailing toward a storm. And the world's watching, your wife, your kids, your team, your brothers. They don't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to have all the answers. They just need to know this. When everything hits the fan, will you be the one standing? Not because you're the strongest, not because you're the smartest, but because you're anchored. Here's the truth that most men don't want to hear. Your greatest leadership moment won't come when you feel in control. It'll come when everything's out of your control and you choose to lead anyway. That's what Paul did. He led on a boat he didn't own, in chains he didn't deserve, through a storm he didn't cause, and onto a shore he couldn't see. But he kept showing up. He stayed faithful. He spoke life. He pointed men to God. That's alpha leadership. So guys, here's your challenge this week. Number 1, I want you to identify your current storm. What area of your life feels chaotic right now? Where are you tempted to panic? Number 2, I want you to anchor up. Get in the Word. Get quiet with God. Ask, what have you promised me in this season? Number 3, I want you to lead anyway. Even if no one listens at first, even if you're overlooked, even if you're still in chains. You don't have to be the captain. You don't have to have the microphone. You just need presence, obedience, and conviction. Because in every room, in every business, every home, the world is desperate for calm, anchored, dangerous men. Be that man. Be the Paul in the panic. Be the voice in the storm. Be the reason other men find courage again. Look, you might lose the ship, but brother, don't ever lose the mission, because that's the call. This is your time. Stay anchored, stay dangerous, stay on mission. I'll see you guys next week. Okay, men, that's our show for this week. Don't forget to download our free guide titled How to Raise Your Testosterone Naturally. You can find the download link in the show notes for this episode on whatever app you're listening to this podcast on. If you've enjoyed today's show, here are 3 ways you can support us. Number 1, share this episode with a friend. Number 2, make sure to like and follow this show, and please consider leaving us a 5-star review. Number 3, give us a follow over at Instagram. We're at Alpha Edge Army. So that's Alpha Edge Army all run together. I really appreciate you men taking the time to listen. And until next week, stay strong.